The night before Mario boarded the flight to Dubai, her mother refused to eat. She sat on the worn mat in their small Lagos apartment, fingers working prayer beads with the intensity of someone fighting an unseen force. The beads clicked rhythmically, click, 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 like a countdown to something inevitable. Mario moved through the dim room, folding clothes into a suitcase she had saved for 3 years to buy. The fabric was faded blue, scarred with scratches from the dusty streets of Lagos, but it represented everything: hope, escape, transformation. Her hands moved quickly, efficiently, as though speed might prevent her mother from seeing the truth written on her face like a map of betrayal. She was leaving, and she was terrified. Terrified of staying. Terrified of going. Terrified most of all that her mother would see through the carefully constructed facade of confidence. Outside, Lagos hummed with its evening symphony, car horns, street vendors calling their wares, neighbors arguing through thin walls. The sounds of a city where opportunities were as scarce as clean water, where girls like Mario sold vegetables in the market under a sun that showed no mercy, earning barely enough to contribute to their mother's struggling household. Mario, her mother's voice cut through the noise like a blade through cloth. It was the voice she used when speaking about serious things: illness, death, money, sin. Where are you really going? Mario did not turn around. She continued folding, pressing each piece with deliberate care. Mama, I told you. I have a job. A good job. In real estate. Tenny arranged everything. Her mother's prayer beat stilled. The silence that followed was heavier than any words. Tenny. That girl who came back with gold on her wrist and lies on her lips. Mario's chest tightened, and she forced brightness into her voice, the voice of someone performing confidence rather than feeling it. Mama, this is opportunity. This is the chance we've been waiting for. Good money. Stable work. I can send you money every month. Real money. Her mother stood slowly, her body moving like someone who carried the weight of prophecy. She was 62 years old but looked older. Years of cleaning houses for wealthy families, of stretching mega salaries to cover rent and food and the small luxuries that made life bearable, had etched themselves into her face. She placed her weathered hands on Mario's shoulders, hands that had wiped away every tear Mario had ever cried, that had braided her hair, that had held her through fevers and heartbreaks, and turned her to face her directly. A mother's prayers are not just words, my daughter. They are anchors. When you go to that place, you will need to remember that I am here, praying. Always praying. Every morning when the sun rises. Every night when the stars come out. I will be on my knees, holding you to this world, keeping you tethered to who you are. Mario felt her throat constrict. She wanted to tell her mother the truth, that she was scared, that she didn't know if she was making the right choice, that the promises Tenny had made seemed almost too good to be true. But instead, she hugged her mother, breathing in the familiar scent of shea butter and worry and the indefinable essence of love. She promised she would call every week. She promised she would be careful. She promised she would send money. She did not know then that promises made in fear are the easiest to break. Tenny had appeared in their neighborhood 6 months earlier like a vision of everything Lagos girls dreamed of becoming. She wore designer clothes that cost more than Mario's monthly salary, fitted dresses that showed off a body maintained by gym memberships and expensive treatments. Her hair was professionally braided in intricate cornrows that took hours and cost money Mario didn't have. Her skin glowed as though she bathed in something imported and exclusive, something that transformed ordinary Nigerian girls into creatures of glamour and mystery. She moved through the market where Mario sold vegetables like she owned the streets themselves, like she had transcended the circumstances that kept women like them tethered to poverty. When Tenny spotted Mario sitting under her umbrella, surrounded by oranges and mangoes arranged in careful pyramids, she screamed with joy and pulled her into an embrace that smelled of imported perfume, something with notes of jasmine and sandalwood that probably came from duty-free shops in airports Mario would never see. Mario. My God, how long has it been? You look exactly the same. The words were kind, but something in Tenny's eyes suggested pity. She was looking at Mariel the way one might look at someone frozen in time, someone left behind, someone who had failed to evolve. She took Mariel's hand and pulled her away from the store, despite Mariel's weak protest, and they walked to a nearby cafe that served cold drinks and pastries. Tenny ordered for both of them without asking what Mariel wanted, confidently selecting items that were clearly expensive, clearly designed for someone with money. They sat at a small table shaded by a green umbrella advertising a beer brand. Tenny crossed her legs, displaying new designer shoes, and leaned forward with the energy of someone sharing secrets that would change everything. "I'm in Dubai now," Tenny announced, settling back in her chair like she was sharing divine news. "Real estate. Commercial properties. The market is booming, Mariel. You wouldn't believe it. Buildings go up overnight. Investors from all over the world throwing money at projects. And they need girls like us." Mariel leaned forward, her pulse quickening. She wanted to ask what girls like us meant, but she thought she knew. Girls from Africa. Girls with ambition. Girls desperate enough to risk everything for something better. "How much do you make?" Mariel asked quietly, almost afraid of the answer, almost afraid to want it too much. Tenny smiled, a smile that contained entire futures, entire lives of possibility. "Last month, I closed 3 deals. I made $20,000 in commission alone. And that was a slow month. When I'm working hard, I can make 50 in a single month. Maybe more." Mariel's mind reeled. That was more than she made in a year selling vegetables. That was enough to rent a better apartment for her mother. That was enough to get her mother out of the cleaning business. That was enough to mean something. "The company provides housing," Tenny continued, her words flowing like honey, sticky and sweet. "They give you a car. You work from a beautiful office in downtown Dubai. You show properties to wealthy investors. You negotiate. You close deals. It's sophisticated work, Mariel. Real work. Not standing in the sun selling fruit. Real work that uses your intelligence, your charm, your abilities." Mariel listened as Tenny painted pictures of glass towers and air-conditioned offices and business lunches in restaurants where a single meal cost more than a month's rent. She listened as Tenny described her new apartment, 3 bedrooms, a view of the marina, a balcony where she watched the sunset every evening with a glass of wine in her hand. She listened as Tenny described the other girls working there, the network of support, the sense of sisterhood among women who had all left their homes searching for the same thing: escape, elevation, transformation. "I could get you in," Tenny said, reaching across the table and taking Mariel's hand. Her nails were perfectly manicured, painted a shade of red that looked like money. "I could make one call, and within 2 weeks, you'd be there. You'd be working. You'd be earning. You'd be becoming someone." Mariel wanted to ask more questions. She wanted to know about the process, about the visa, about whether she would be alone in a foreign country, about whether she could really do this. But Tenny's confidence was contagious, and her own desperation was louder than her doubt. "Really?" Mariel asked. "You could really get me in?" "Really," Tenny said. "I promise you, Mariel. This is real. This is happening. You just have to say yes." Over the next 2 weeks, Tenny made the call. She sent documents through an email account set up by Crescent Properties. She arranged interviews via video call on her laptop in Mariel's small room, coaching her on what to say, what to wear, how to present herself as ambitious and professional and ready to take on the world. She promised that Mariel's life was about to transform into something unrecognizable. Something golden. Mariel said yes to everything. The Dubai office of Crescent Properties occupied the 42nd floor of a gleaming tower in the Business Bay. The building itself seemed to defy physics, all curves and glass, reflecting the sky so perfectly that it appeared to be made of clouds. When Maria walked in on her first day, her breath caught in her throat and didn't fully release for hours. Everything was marble and glass and steel. The floors were polished so that you could see your reflection if you looked down, which Maria did obsessively, checking and rechecking that she looked acceptable, that she belonged in a place like this. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the city stretching endlessly below, a kingdom of steel and ambition, of buildings that climbed toward heaven with the desperation of people trying to reach God and settle for altitude instead. The other agents were women like her, young, African, hungry. They moved through the office with professional efficiency, wearing business suits and carrying tablets and speaking into Bluetooth headsets with the confidence of women who had already made it, who were already saved. She was given a desk near a window. The view alone was worth more than her mother's entire salary. She could see the Palm Jumeirah, that artificial island shaped like a palm tree, a monument to human capability and excess, and beyond it, the endless blue of the Persian Gulf. Her supervisor, Mr. Hossein, was a Lebanese man in his 50s with kind eyes and a practiced smile that had clearly been refined through years of managing young women with stars in their eyes. He showed her to her desk and explained the job with the care of someone describing something simple and natural, something that required no moral examination. You will be contacting investors, he explained, his English accented but precise. Many from the Middle East, Europe, America. You'll be hosting property viewings, understanding client needs, presenting our portfolio, closing sales. The commission structure is generous. Most of our girls make excellent money. Crescent Properties takes care of its people. The wordy girls unsettled her slightly, but she pushed the feeling away. She was here to work. She was here to build a future. For the first 2 weeks, it was exactly as Tenny had described. Maria showed properties to genuine investors, businessmen and entrepreneurs and wealthy families looking to invest in Dubai's booming real estate market. She walked through modern apartments with their perfectly staged furniture and artificial flowers, pointing out features, describing amenities, answering questions about payment plans and financing options. She attended training sessions where she learned about property values and market trends and how to read a client's needs before they even articulated them. She closed her first deal, a 2-bedroom apartment sold to a businessman from London for nearly $1 million. When she received her commission check, approximately 30,000 dirhams, roughly $8,000, she felt tears spring to her eyes. She sent half of it home to her mother. She called her mother that evening, and her mother wept at the other end of the line. Allah has blessed you, my daughter, her mother said. You are doing good work. I am so proud. Maria called her mother every evening, describing the office, the city, the glittering towers that caught the sun and threw it back at the sky like they were arguing with God about which one was more beautiful. She described the restaurants where she sometimes took clients for lunch, where a single meal cost more than she used to make in a week. She described her small apartment, which was nicer than anywhere she'd ever lived. She described the feeling of possibility, of being elevated, of being someone. Her mother listened quietly and asked her to pray every night before sleep. Remember who you are, her mother would say. Remember where you come from. Remember that no matter how far you go, I am here holding you with my prayers. Maria prayed. She was happy. Or at least, she was becoming the kind of person who could be happy in a place like Dubai, in a job like this, in a life that seemed to be leading somewhere bright and gold. Then everything changed. 3 weeks into her employment, Tenny invited her to dinner at an upscale restaurant in the marina, a man-made waterway bordered with exclusive shops and restaurants where people like Maria, people from Lagos, people who had grown up with nothing, could walk and pretend they belonged. The restaurant was Italian, with white tablecloths and candles and wine lists that required study. Tenny ordered for both of them without asking, selecting a wine that was probably expensive and a pasta dish that came with truffle shavings, those dark fungi that cost more per gram than cocaine. Over wine and pasta, Tenny's demeanor shifted. She became less friendly, more businesslike. The warmth drained from her face like water from a broken vessel, leaving something harder, more calculating underneath. "Mariel, you're good at this job," Tenny said, leaning forward. Her manicured nails tapped against the wine glass, click, 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 like a countdown. "But you're leaving money on the table. Real money. The kind of money that changes families." Mariel's smile faltered. Something in Tenny's voice had changed, and it frightened her. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Tenny said, her voice dropping so that Mariel had to lean in to hear her over the ambient noise of the restaurant, "that wealthy men don't just want to buy property. They want companionship. They want to feel understood. They want to feel desired by a beautiful woman who makes them feel like they're the most important man in the world. And they'll pay obscene amounts of money for that feeling. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dirhams for a single evening." The wine turned sour in Mariel's mouth. She set down her glass with deliberate care. "Tenny, I don't." "You don't have to do anything illegal," Tenny interrupted smoothly, holding up her hand like a traffic cop stopping oncoming vehicles. "You show up to dinners. You look beautiful, and you always look beautiful, Mariel. Your bone structure, your eyes, your presence. You're exactly what these men want. You listen to their stories. You laugh at their jokes. You make them feel like the most important man in the world for one evening. You touch their arm when they say something amusing. You lean close when they speak. You let them feel like they have a chance with you, even though they know they don't. And then you go home with enough money to support your family for a month. Maybe more." "That's prostitution," Mariel said quietly. The word felt obscene in the elegant restaurant, out of place among the expensive wines and the soft Italian music. Tenny's expression hardened. Her eyes became cold, like she was looking at something disgusting. "That's business. That's capitalism. That's taking control of your own destiny instead of waiting for a man to give you permission to live. That's taking what the world owes you because you were born a woman in a poor country." "I'm leaving," Mariel said, gathering her bag with trembling hands. Tenny reached across the table and grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. Her perfectly manicured fingers dug into Mariel's skin. "Your visa is dependent on your employment with Crescent Properties. Your housing is provided by the company. Your work permit, your residency, all of it hangs on your contract. And your contract says you participate in all company-related activities and client entertainment as directed. So you're not leaving. You're going to that dinner tomorrow night in the Burj Al Arab, and you're going to make that man feel like the luckiest man alive." Mariel tried to pull her hand away, but Tenny's grip was firm. She looked around the restaurant, wondering if anyone was watching, if anyone would help her if she screamed. But the other diners were lost in their own conversations, their own expensive meals, their own carefully constructed words. "And if I refuse?" Mariel whispered. Tenny smiled, and it was the smile of a predator. "Then your visa gets revoked. You get deported. Your mother's apartment, the one you've been paying for with your salary, gets cut off. And everyone back home learns that you failed. That you couldn't handle it. That you're not the success story you promised to be." She released Mariel's wrist and sat back, composed and elegant, as if they'd been discussing nothing more significant than the weather. "The car will pick you up at 7 tomorrow, Tenny said, returning to her poster. "Wear the red dress I bought you. The one that makes you look like you cost more than you're worth." The man's name was Sheikh Ahmad. He was 65, built like a bull who had been fed expensive grass and premium feedstock for decades, with the confidence of someone who had never been told no and couldn't imagine a universe in which such a word existed. He had dark eyes that moved over women like a scanner, assessing value, calculating worth, determining price. He picked up Mario and two other girls from the hotel in a champagne-colored Range Rover with leather seats and a driver who didn't speak and windows so tinted that the outside world disappeared into shadow. The other girls, one named Amara from Ghana, another named Zainab from Somalia, sat in the back with Mario. They were experienced at this. They moved with the casual acceptance of people who had made a peace with degradation, or perhaps who had simply given up fighting it. First time? Amara asked, smiling sympathetically. Mario nodded, not trusting her voice. It gets easier, Zainab said quietly. She was very thin, with bones that seemed too close to her skin, with eyes that had the hollow quality of someone who had seen too much too soon. You just have to disconnect. Imagine you're watching it happen to someone else. Imagine you're in the audience, not on the stage. The penthouse was in the Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the world, which meant that Sheikh Ahmad literally lived higher than most people could dream. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed the city spread below like a circuit board, glittering with a billion lights, each one representing someone else's dream or ambition or desperation. There were drugs on the glass table. Cocaine in small piles, arranged with the precision of someone proud of their collection. Heroin in small bags. Prescription pills, Xanax, Valium, Oxycontin, mixed together with alcohol in crystal glasses. The other girls partook immediately, inhaling the cocaine, swallowing the pills, drinking the alcohol. It was Amma, Mario realized. It was the only way to survive what was about to happen. Not for me, Mario said when Sheikh Ahmad offered her the table. He laughed, a sound like gravel in a cement mixer. A good girl. I like that. For now. What followed was a nightmare wearing the costume of entertainment. Sheikh Ahmad wanted the girls to dance. He played music, rap, hip-hop, electronic, turned loud enough to vibrate in your bones. He watched them with the hungry eyes of a man accustomed to owning things, accustomed to consuming them. When one of the other girls, not Zainab, not Amara, a third girl Mario hadn't been introduced to, resisted his advances, tried to politely redirect his hands when they became too intimate, he slapped her across the face. The sound of his hand connecting with her cheek echoed through the penthouse like a gunshot. The girl staggered back, hand flying to her face, tears springing immediately to her eyes. Sheikh Ahmad laughed and pulled her back toward him. I paid for you, he said conversationally, as if explaining a simple principle of economics. That means you do what I want. Mario felt her soul detaching from her body, watching this scene with the dissociation that Zainab had described. She was no longer in the penthouse. She was above it, outside it, somewhere safe where she couldn't feel what was happening. She could see herself standing in the corner, could see her body in the red dress that had felt so elegant in the hotel room, could see her face frozen in an expression of careful blankness. The night stretched on, hours becoming a blur of music and degradation and the slow, dawning understanding that she had stepped into a world from which she might never escape. The men, there were other men now, friends of Sheikh Ahmad, came and went, treating the girls like items on a buffet, sampling and discarding and coming back for more. There were moments of violence, though nothing that left visible marks. There were moments of humiliation so profound that Maria understood for the first time why people sometimes chose death over continuation. Then everything changed. Zainab, the quiet girl from Somalia, collapsed. Her body convulsed on the marble floor with a violence that seemed to come from somewhere else, somewhere inhuman. Her eyes rolled back until only the whites showed. Foam formed at the corners of her mouth, white and viscous. Her limbs flailed like they were puppets controlled by someone having a seizure themselves. Zainab! Mario screamed, rushing toward the girl. She's fine, Sheikh Ahmad said from across the room, barely looking up from his phone. She always does this. But Zainab was not fine. Her breathing became labored, a horrifying sound like something drowning in air. Her skin took on a grayish tint, the color of death, the color of someone whose body was shutting down system by system. She had taken something, had mixed something, combined things that should never be combined, probably under pressure from Sheikh Ahmad or one of his friends who wanted to see her more compliant, more pliable, more destroyed. Mariel, with no medical training but driven by pure desperation, by the knowledge that this girl was dying in front of her, began performing CPR. She had learned it once, years ago in secondary school, from a teacher who probably never imagined the circumstances under which her students would need it. Mariel compressed Zainab's chest, feeling the fragile cage of ribs under her palms. She tilted the girl's head back and breathed air into her lungs, tasting something foul and chemical on Zainab's lips. The other girls watched in horror, frozen. Sheikh Ahmad had disappeared into another room, apparently unable to be bothered with a medical emergency. Mariel kept compressions going. Count of 30, 2 breaths, count of 30, 2 breaths. Her arms burned. Sweat dripped into her eyes. She was crying, she realized, tears mixing with the exertion of trying to keep this girl alive, trying to be the difference between her existing and ceasing to exist. By the time the ambulance arrived, called finally by the hotel staff who heard the commotion and reported it, Zainab was breathing. Barely. Her chest was rising and falling in shallow increments, but there was movement, there was oxygen being exchanged, there was life. The paramedics rushed in with a stretcher and oxygen masks and the efficient movement of people trained to process tragedy. As they loaded Zainab into the ambulance, one of them looked at Mariel with an expression that might have been pity or might have been judgment. It was impossible to tell. In her hotel room that night, Mariel sat in the shower, scrubbing her skin until it bled. The water ran red, then pink, then clear again, but she couldn't feel clean. She scrubbed her arms. She scrubbed her legs. She scrubbed between her toes and behind her ears and along her scalp. She was trying to remove not dirt but something more fundamental, the feeling that she had been contaminated, that she was no longer herself but something else, something that had been created in that penthouse and would never fully wash away. She thought of her mother's words. A mother's prayers are not just words, my daughter. They are anchors. When you go to that place, you will need to remember that I am here, praying. Always praying. And in that moment, sitting naked on the tile floor of a luxury hotel bathroom in Dubai, Mariel felt it. Not as a mystical force or divine intervention, but as a presence. A tether. A connection to something real and true and rooted in love. Her mother was praying, she knew. Her mother was on her knees at that very moment, or had been, or would be, refusing to let her daughter disappear into the darkness. She could feel it like a rope thrown across distance, like a voice calling to her across an impossible void. She realized then that her mother had been praying all night. Every night. Her mother's prayers had stopped her from sinking completely into the abyss. Her mother's prayers had given her the strength to save Zainab. Her mother's prayers were what kept some small, essential part of her intact. Mariel stood up on shaking legs and wrapped herself in a towel. She looked at herself in the mirror, her hair matted, her face hollow-eyed, her body marked with bruises she couldn't quite remember receiving. She looked at this stranger and made a decision. She would run. She would escape. She would find help. She would find the embassy. The escape was not dramatic. There was no chase scene, no dramatic flight across the desert. Mariel simply walked out of the hotel with a small bag containing her passport, which Tenny had carelessly left in the office one day, too confident in her control to bother with security, and some money she had hidden away in dribs and drabs, money that had been spared from her salary, money that might have gone to her mother but that she had instinctively preserved for emergencies. She got into a taxi and gave the driver the address of the Nigerian embassy, her hands shaking as she clutched the address written on a scrap of paper. But she did not make it far. 2 blocks from the embassy, a white car pulled up beside her taxi. Men in dark sunglasses got out, 3 of them, moving with the casual efficiency of people performing a routine task. They gestured for her to exit the taxi. They showed her paperwork, official-looking documents with stamps and seals, though she didn't know that they were forged, that they had been printed the night before on a computer in Crescent Properties office, suggesting that she had violated her work visa conditions and was being detained for processing. The taxi driver shrugged apologetically and drove away. The men were not rough, which was somehow worse. They were polite. Professional. They explained that there had been a misunderstanding, that she needed to come with them to sort out some immigration issues. They assured her it would be resolved quickly. They placed her in the back seat of the car between two of the men, and the third drove. The next thing she knew, she was in a police station, or something that looked like one. The interrogation began immediately. The allegations were surreal, like nightmare logic made bureaucratic. They were arresting Mario, a Nigerian prostitute engaged in illegal sex work, they said. They had paperwork showing she had worked in the sex trade. They had statements from Sheikh Ahmad claiming she had stolen jewelry worth 50,000 dirhams from his penthouse. They had photos, security camera footage, showing her with other girls, dressed provocatively, in situations that were obviously illicit. Sheikh Ahmad, it turned out, had connections. Powerful connections. The kind of connections that could make a girl disappear from the narrative entirely and reappear as the criminal, as the perpetrator rather than the victim. The police seemed far more interested in detaining Mario than in investigating the men who had enslaved her, who had drugged Zainab into near death, who had pocketed the money that should have gone to legitimate sales. Mario was placed in a holding cell with 6 other women, some Nigerian, some from other African countries, some from Southeast Asia. They looked at her with a familiarity born of shared experience, and one older woman, from Ghana, took her hand. "First time?" the woman asked. Mario nodded, unable to speak. "It's a trap," the woman said quietly. "A trap made just for us. Girls with no one to come looking for us. Girls from countries where our embassies have limited power. Girls whose families can't afford lawyers. We're the perfect victims because no one will believe us." She was right. Maria understood, sitting in that cell with its concrete walls and its single window that looked onto another wall, that she had walked into a machinery designed perfectly to ensnare girls exactly like her. Girls from poor countries. Girls with ambitions that outpaced their opportunities. Girls with mothers counting on them. Girls whom no one would believe. She was allowed one phone call. The guard watched as she dialed her mother's number, and her hands shook so badly she had to try 3 times to get the digits right. Her mother answered on the first ring, as if she had been sitting with the phone in her lap, waiting for exactly this call, having prayed it into existence and now receiving it like a prophet receiving a vision. "Mama," Maria said, her voice steady despite the terror coursing through her, dissolving her into liquid fear and desperation, "I need you to pray like you've never prayed before. I'm in trouble, Mama. Real trouble." Her mother's response was immediate, without confusion or panic, with the certainty of someone who had always known this moment might come and had prepared spiritually for it. "I am already praying, my daughter. I have been praying since you left. I prayed when you told me about the job. I prayed every moment you were gone. And I will continue to pray now, but I will pray louder. I will pray with the strength of 1,000 women. I will pray until God himself has to listen." The line went dead. The call time was up. 3 days later, a man appeared at the detention center. His name was Adeyemi Okonkwo, and he was a lawyer employed by the Nigerian embassy. He was tall, perhaps 6'2", with intelligent eyes that had seen too much suffering and refused to stop caring about it anyway. His suit was well-tailored but not expensive. He carried a worn leather briefcase filled with papers and the kind of determination that came from having fought similar battles and knowing exactly where the weak points in the system were. He asked to speak with Mario in a private room, a luxury the detention center barely provided, a room that might have been used for interrogations but that he claimed for legal consultation. When they were alone, he sat across from her and simply listened as she talked, not taking many notes, just listening with the kind of attention that made her feel, for the first time since arriving in Dubai, like someone was actually hearing her. "The charges are false," he told her after she had finished, after she had told him everything. His voice was calm, professional, the voice of someone who had spoken these words before and knew their power. "Sheikh Ahmad has money and connections, but he also has a history. I found 3 other women with similar stories to yours. He's been doing this for years. The police have been paid to make you disappear, to make all of you disappear, but I have also discovered that your documentation of the employment situation, the contracts, the communications with Tenny, the recordings of Tenny explaining what the job really entailed, proves coercion. It proves trafficking." He pulled out a folder filled with photographs. They showed Mario and other girls at the penthouse. They showed Zainab lying on the floor. They showed security footage from the hotel showing Mario being forced into the white car. He had been building a case, he explained, and she was the piece he had been waiting for, a victim who had tried to escape, who had evidence of her own exploitation, who could testify. "Why are you doing this?" Mario asked, her voice breaking under the weight of gratitude and disbelief. "Why do you care?" "Because it is right," Mr. Okonkwo said simply. "And because I believe in the power of a second chance. Everyone deserves one." He worked the case with meticulous attention over the following weeks. He contacted journalists, international journalists, human rights organizations, media outlets that had platforms large enough to put pressure on the Dubai authorities. He applied pressure to international organizations. He proved that Mario had been trafficked for labor and sexual exploitation, not that she was a willing sex worker. He filed motion after motion. He requested her release on bail, arguing that she was a victim and a witness, not a criminal. He documented the corruption in the case against her, the forged documents, the paid-off police officers, the convenient silence of witnesses who would have corroborated her story. Mr. Okonkwo visited her every day. He brought her books to read, novels, poetry, philosophy, things that would transport her mind away from the detention center. He told her about his own daughter, who was Mario's age and lived in Lagos, who was studying to be a doctor. He told her stories about cases he had won, about girls who had escaped and rebuilt their lives. He told her that the world was not all darkness, that there were still people who would fight for justice, that there were still people who believed in the power of redemption. "How did you become a lawyer?" Maria asked one day, wanting to understand what had shaped this man into someone who would spend his time fighting for girls he didn't know, girls who couldn't pay him, girls whose cases would never make him rich or famous. "I watched my sister disappear," Mr. Okonkwo said quietly. "When I was 16. She was trafficked to Europe. It took me 15 years to find out what happened to her, and by then it was too late. She had died of an overdose in a brothel in Berlin. The police in Germany didn't care. The police in Nigeria didn't care. No one cared until it was too late. I became a lawyer so that I would never have to feel that helplessness again, so that I could fight for the ones like my sister, for the ones who are still alive, for the ones who might still be saved." Mario felt tears stream down her face. She understood then that suffering, when it was channeled properly, when it was transformed by will and determination, could become a tool for good. That loss could become purpose. The trial lasted 3 months. During that time, Mr. Okonkwo ensured that Mario's story was told completely, in all its terrible detail. Psychological experts testified about trauma and coercion and the neurological effects of repeated sexual assault. They explained how the brain, when faced with situations of extreme duress, enters a state of dissociation, how survival mechanisms override rational thought, how a person can find themselves in a nightmare and be utterly unable to wake up. The other girls testified. Amora from Ghana described being promised legitimate work and ending up enslaved. She spoke of the fear, the isolation, the way Tenny and the managers at Crescent Properties had systematically destroyed their sense of self-worth until they believed they deserved what was happening to them. Zainab, recovering in a hospital, testified via video link, her thin frame barely visible on the screen, her voice small but steady as she described her overdose, as she described waking up in the hospital and realizing she had almost died, that death had come that close and she had been dragged back by a girl she barely knew. A former employee of Crescent Properties testified that the company had a systematic process for identifying vulnerable women, recruiting them with false promises, and then trapping them through debt manipulation and visa confiscation. She provided documentation showing that Sheikh Ahmad was a regular client, that the company maintained detailed records of which girls he preferred, that management actively encouraged girls to engage with him despite, or perhaps because of, his non-violence. Tenny was not present at the trial, but her communications were. Messages where she discussed Mario as a fresh asset. Recorded phone conversations where she explained the job to other potential recruits, using almost identical language, revealing the pattern. Video footage of her recruiting women in Lagos, showing her the exact same techniques, the exact same promises. Her trail of exploitation was meticulously documented, a breadcrumb path leading back to every girl she had trafficked. The prosecution's case began to crumble under the weight of Mario's evidence, under the testimony of the other girls, under the documentation that Mr. Okonkwo presented with the efficiency of a surgeon removing a tumor. The stolen jewelry charge was exposed as fabricated, the diamonds had never been reported missing to insurance companies. The photographs presented as evidence were examined by forensic experts who identified inconsistencies, manipulation, evidence of doctrine. Sheikh Ahmad's lawyers tried a counteroffensive. They presented Mario as a willing participant who had later regretted her choices. They suggested she had stolen the jewelry and was now making false accusations to cover her crime. They painted her as a gold digger who had seduced their client and then blackmailed him when he refused to continue the affair. But the jury, which included women, including women who had daughters, including women who understood what it meant to be vulnerable in a world designed to exploit that vulnerability, did not believe them. When the judge declared Mario not guilty of all charges, reading the verdict with a voice that carried some weight of emotion beneath its formal tone, Mario felt something shift inside her. Not healing, not yet, but the possibility of healing. The possibility of a future that didn't begin with the word guilty. She collapsed. The bailiff moved toward her, concerned she was having a medical emergency, but it was not an emergency. It was the simple release of 3 months of terror, 3 months of believing that the system was designed to destroy her, 3 months of sitting in a holding cell wondering if this was how her life would end, trapped, destroyed, forgotten. Mr. Okonkwo held her as she wept, not tears of sadness but of the profound relief of being believed, of being vindicated, of being returned to herself. Tenny, meanwhile, had been arrested independently. Police had discovered that she was not just a trafficker but also a drug distributor. She had been supplying Zainab with a mixture that nearly killed her, a combination of heroin and fentanyl that she had sourced from dealers in the UAE, that she had given to girls to make them more compliant, more willing, more destroyed. She had also been involved in an attempted kidnapping case. A girl who had fled and tried to hide with a sympathetic hotel employee had been tracked down by people Tenny hired, had been dragged back, had been beaten severely enough that she required hospitalization. Tenny was facing charges of human trafficking, drug trafficking, attempted kidnapping of a minor, and assault. The evidence against her was overwhelming. During her trial, she sat in the defendant's chair with an expression of absolute certainty that none of this was real, that the system would somehow understand that she had only been doing what everyone else was doing, that she had only been surviving the only way she knew how. I grew up poor, she testified, her voice defensive. I was hungry. I was tired of being hungry. I did what I had to do to eat. I did what I had to do to matter. These girls knew what they were getting into. I didn't force anyone. But the girls testified that she had lied. That she had manipulated them. That she had personally handed them over to men with violence in their eyes and money in their pockets. That she had done this not out of necessity but out of greed, out of the belief that she was better than the girls she trafficked, that she had transcended her poverty in a way that justified using others to stay elevated. The jury found her guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 8 years in a Dubai detention facility, a place designed primarily for men, though women's sections existed. She would spend those years in a cell that was not so different from the ones she had confined Mariel and the other girls to, in a space where time moved slowly and regret had nowhere to hide. During her sentencing, Tenny showed no remorse. She blamed Mariel. She blamed economic circumstances. She blamed the system. She blamed everyone but herself. Even as the judge read her sentence, even as she realized that the next 8 years of her life had been decided, she maintained that cold expression of someone who believed they had done nothing wrong. But the other girls testified against her. They spoke of how she had recruited them, how she had lied to them, how she had handed them over to men who saw them as commodities, as objects, as things to be consumed and discarded. Their testimonies were devastating, particularly Amora's, who spoke of being tracked down by Tenny's associates after she fled to a women's shelter, of being beaten and brought back, of being told that escape was not an option because Tenny owned her now, had invested in her, had a right to her. In the end, Tenny was simply another trafficker, and her punishment was simply another footnote in the long, terrible history of exploitation, another name added to a list that was far too long and growing longer every day. Mr. Okonkwo's support did not end with Mariel's acquittal. With the embassy's help, he arranged for her to stay in Dubai temporarily while she recovered. He found her a place in a safe house operated by an international organization dedicated to trafficking victims. He helped her access counseling, trauma counseling, from a psychologist who had worked with survivors of extreme abuse and who understood that some scars were internal, that some wounds were not visible but no less real. He helped her process the trauma, the nightmares, the sudden moments when she would smell something, a cologne, a perfume, a scent of alcohol, and her body would respond with panic, with memories that felt like they were happening in real time rather than in the past. The difficulty trusting anyone, the way her nervous system had been retrained to expect violence, to anticipate betrayal. Healing is not linear, her therapist, Dr. Khalifa, told her during one session. There will be good days and bad days. There will be moments when you feel strong and moments when you feel like you're back in that penthouse. This is normal. This is what trauma does. The goal is not to never feel afraid or sad again. The goal is to learn to carry these feelings without letting them define you. And somewhere in the midst of those daily sessions, somewhere in the midst of Mr. Okonkwo's continuing visits to the safe house, something shifted. He began telling her about his own dreams. About his childhood in a small town in Nigeria, about his mother who had sacrificed everything for his education. About his late wife, Sarah, who had been a teacher, who had died of cancer 5 years earlier, who had left a hole in his life that he had filled with work, with law, with the quest for justice. I haven't loved anyone since Sarah, he told her one evening as they sat in the safe house garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and orange, gold that no longer felt like a threat to Mariel, but like a reminder that beauty could exist, that the world contained things other than trauma and exploitation. I didn't think I could. I didn't think I deserved to be happy when so many people I fought for never got their happy ending. My mother always said that happiness is not something you deserve or don't deserve, Mariel replied quietly. It's something you choose. Every day. By choosing to hope. By choosing to believe that the future can be different from the past. Mr. Okonkwo turned to look at her fully then, and she saw something shift in his eyes. I believe your mother is a wise woman. I am broken, Mariel told him honestly during one conversation, weeks into her recovery. She said it not as a plea for reassurance, but as a statement of fact. There are parts of me I don't know if I'll ever recover. Parts that feel permanent, like they've been changed at a molecular level. "We are all broken," Mr. Okonkwo replied. They were sitting on the balcony of the safe house, overlooking the city, and the evening air carried the salt smell of the Gulf. "The question is not whether we are broken, but whether we choose to be healed together. Whether we choose to let other people help carry the weight of our brokenness. Whether we choose to believe that companionship, that love, that connection can coexist with our pain." And Maria understood that this was the beginning of something. Not something that would erase what had happened. Not something that would make the trauma disappear. But something that would run parallel to it, something that could grow alongside her pain without being eclipsed by it. Maria spent 6 months recovering in Dubai with Mr. Okonkwo's support. During that time, she attended therapy sessions 3 times a week. She learned to sleep without nightmares, or at least, learned to wake from nightmares without becoming entirely overwhelmed by them. She learned to look in mirrors without seeing a stranger, without seeing a girl who had been marked and broken and permanently altered. She began to write, initially in a journal that Dr. Khalifa suggested, writing down her memories not to relive them but to externalize them, to move them from the internal landscape of constant replay to the page where she could observe them with a small measure of distance. "I want to ask you something," Mr. Okonkwo said, turning to face her. "But I want to be honest first. I'm asking you knowing that I may destroy the good thing we have built together. I'm asking you knowing that you may say no. And I'm asking you knowing that either way, I will respect your answer and my support will not change." Maria's heart was racing, but she nodded for him to continue. "I want to build a life with you," he said. "Not because I think I can fix you or save you or complete you. Not because I believe love is a salve that will heal all your wounds. But because I believe that 2 broken people, if they choose each other, if they choose to be honest with each other, if they choose to carry each other's pain with gentleness and respect, can create something meaningful. Something beautiful. I believe that together we could do work that matters. I believe that your story, combined with my dedication to justice, could change lives." He paused, and his hand trembled slightly as he reached into his pocket. "Will you marry me, Maria? Not because it's romantic or because it will fix what happened to you. But because I believe in you. Because I believe in us. Because I believe that your life is not defined by what was done to you, but by what you choose to do next." The ring he pulled from his pocket was simple, a band of white gold with a small diamond. Not ostentatious. Not designed to impress. Just honest and real and solid, like the man offering it. Maria looked at the ring, at Mr. Okonkwo's face, at the dials in the water, at the sky that was beginning to shift from blue to purple as evening approached. She thought of her mother, praying thousands of miles away. She thought of the girl she had been in the market, selling oranges. She thought of the girl in the penthouse, dissociated and broken. She thought of the girl she was becoming, a girl who could choose her own future, who could choose love not because she was broken but despite being broken, who could choose to heal. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." 2 years later, Maria and Adeyemi Okonkwo stood in their newly opened law office in Lagos. The sign on the door read, "Okonkwo and Maria Legal Defense, specializing in human trafficking and exploitation cases." The office was small but professional, with modern furniture and a waiting room where traumatized girls could sit without feeling judged, without feeling like criminals. Maria was not a lawyer, not yet. She was pursuing her degree in social work through distance learning, a process that was slow and demanding but that she was committed to. But her real expertise came from her lived experience, from the fact that every girl who walked through their door saw someone who understood, who had been where they were, who knew that recovery was possible because she was recovering. She counseled trafficking victims. She helped them navigate the legal system. She sat with them in their pain and showed them that survival was not the same as thriving, but that thriving could come later, with time and support and the right people believing in you. Adeyemi handled the legal aspects, fighting cases with the same meticulous attention he had devoted to Maria's case. Together, they had already freed 7 girls from trafficking situations. They had pursued charges against 3 traffickers. They were building something that mattered. Mariel's mother came to the office opening. The old woman wept when she saw the sign with Mariel's name on it. She held her daughter close and whispered, "I told you my prayers were anchors. They held you when you were drowning. They brought you home." "You did, Mama," Mariel replied, tears streaming down her own face. "And you were right. You were right all along." The office opening was attended by journalists, by representatives from international organizations, by other trafficking survivors who had heard about what Maria and Adeyemi were doing and wanted to be part of it. Zainab came, the girl who had overdosed, who had spent months in recovery but who was now in school, studying nursing, determined to work with trauma victims herself. Amora came from Ghana, bringing stories of the other girls she had reconnected with. Even some of the police officers who had initially tried to prosecute Maria attended, ashamed now of what they had been willing to do for money, ready to work differently. Late one night, as Maria and Adeyemi worked late in the office reviewing case files, Maria paused at the window overlooking the Lagos street below. The city hummed with its evening symphony, with the sounds of millions of people living their lives, struggling and surviving and hoping and dreaming. Somewhere in the darkness, other girls were being recruited by other tenors. Other promises were being made. Other traps were being set. "Do you ever wonder if we are making any difference?" she asked her husband, not taking her eyes from the window. Adeyemi came and stood beside her, taking her hand, holding it with the gentleness of someone who understood that touch could be a source of trauma or a source of healing, depending on how it was offered. "Every day," he said honestly. "But then I remember that every girl we help is a girl who might otherwise have become another statistic. Every girl we free is a girl who gets to choose her own future. Every prosecution we win sends a message to the traffickers that we will not be silent. That we are watching. That we are fighting." Maria nodded. She thought of Zainab, who had survived her overdose and was now in her 2nd year of nursing school, working part-time at a hospital and volunteering at a women's shelter in her spare time. She thought of Amora, who had gone back to school in Ghana and was now training to be a social worker, determined to work with trafficking survivors in her country. She thought of the 7 girls they had freed from active trafficking situations, girls who were now in safe houses, receiving counseling, beginning the long journey of recovery. "God is just an illusion," Maria said softly, still looking at the city below. "My mother tried to tell me that, though she didn't use those exact words. Tenny tried to show me that, though she meant it differently. But I had to learn it the hardest way possible, had to be broken by it to understand it." "And now?" Adeyemi asked, squeezing her hand gently. "Now," Maria said, turning to face him, seeing in his eyes the reflection of someone who loved her not despite her trauma but as a complete human being who contained her trauma as one aspect of who she was, "I know that the only gold worth having is the gold of a life lived with integrity. The gold of knowing you've helped someone. The gold of love that isn't bought or sold but freely given. The gold of being able to look in the mirror and recognize yourself." Adeyemi pulled her close, and they stood together in the small office that had become their sanctuary, their mission, their redemption. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent and vast and full of both cruelty and kindness, both exploitation and hope. In a small apartment not far from the office, Mariel's mother knelt on her mat and continued to pray. The prayer beads moved through her fingers with the rhythm of decades, with the rhythm of a woman who had learned that prayer was not about asking God to change circumstances but about changing herself, about maintaining connection, about holding loved ones safely in the web of faith and love. Golden illusion had been shattered, replaced by something far more precious, truth. Purpose. The understanding that a life spent fighting for justice, spent healing trauma, spent standing with the broken, was a life worth living. Outside the window of the safe house, another girl arrived, frightened, traumatized, believing that her life was over. And Maria was there to meet her, to take her hand, to look into her eyes and say, "You survived. That means you are already brave." Let me show you what comes next. And in Dubai, in a prison cell, Tenny sat and tried to understand how her life had become this. How her survival strategy had become her downfall. How the girls she had trafficked had become the weaknesses who destroyed her. 8 years stretched ahead of her like a prison sentence written in time, each day a small death, each night a small mother of hope. But that was Tenny's story now. The story that mattered, the story that continued to unfold, was Moreo's. A story of survival and healing. A story of a woman who had been broken and had chosen to be remade. A story of the power of mother's prayers. A story of the possibility of justice, even in a world that sometimes seemed designed to deny it. And every evening, in an office in Lagos, 2 people worked late into the night, fighting one case at a time, one girl at a time, one second chance at a time, believing that the world could be different, that justice could be served, that love could emerge from the darkest places and shine like gold, but the real kind, the kind that didn't burn, the kind that lasted, the kind that was worth the price of a human soul.